Paul, over to you.
Good morning. David,
Somebody
we can hear you typing.
Mute.
David, we can hear you typing.
Hear you typing. There you go.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Beyer from GAI Insights, and welcome to our daily GenAI news briefing, where we discuss and rate top news items. Our team of AI analysts rate each article as essential, important, or optional for executives and leaders at companies. Today's discussion will be led by John.
Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. Today, we've got some interesting things in terms of technology announcements, some improvements to large language models, text to image on devices. We got some regulatory implications and also some research, as well as a really interesting case study with, I think, kind of a funky name from Amazon called Rufus. So we're going to go through those and see what is important, optional, or are essential for our AI leader. So if we could see the first. This is the Microsoft Laser LLM. Tim, I asked, could you start us off on the implications of this way of dealing with inaccuracies?
Sure. This is an interesting article from a research organization. So I would characterize it as optional, but interesting for our target audience of AI leaders. It's still research, and yet another, the trend is important to understand. This is yet another way of potentially shrinking models and without losing any accuracy. In fact, the surprising thing was that they shrunk the parameter base and found it to be more accurate. So also another indication that we still don't understand these things very well. It's very, very early days, and no one, I think, would have predicted. The mathematical term is, generally speaking, the reason we build these larger language models with more parameters is the performance is monotonically increasing, as a Harvard Business School professor might say. That is, the more parameters, generally, the better the performance. It's linearly increasing. This reversed that. They cut parameters. Effectively, it's a little more complicated than that, but they cut parameters out and got better performance. But it's research, so it's like many other things that are being done to create smaller models with higher accuracy. It's going to change the nature of foundation models over the next few years, but nothing tomorrow.
So,
yeah,
so you're proposing optional. Okay.
Optional. All right, I hear optional. Important trend in terms of improvement. Chris, good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Yeah, on my end, I think it's definitely a very interesting research. I think there's a lot of opportunity with these smaller models going forward. How many parameters are needed to work? And then when you can train it specifically on good data instead of just all data, will that make an impact? So I think it's an important trend. I think it's an optional thing to read, but there's a lot of cool acronyms that I'm seeing out there. Laser now happens to be a new one, but I've seen Raptor, I've seen all these acronyms. So hopefully we can keep up.
Yeah.
So, Tim, I wanted to highlight the thing you're talking about is, so we don't know how these things work, but we're pushing on them and making them better. So we have high confidence that we're making them better, but it's still staying a little bit of black box internally. Is that the right summary?
Yep. Well, that's classic engineering. You know, engineering doesn't care how things work. They just care that they work empirically.
Right. Yeah. I think Wolfram said it best, which is we need a science of large language models.
We do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, optional.
And we don't even know how to test them. So it's also the side science on the side to try to figure out when we have changed parameters, whether it still works and in which cases it doesn't work. So this is also evolving.
Sure. I mean, we do have some tests that from an engineering standpoint, hey, will this bridge stand up? You know, will this model work within our risk parameters? We do that, but you don't have any kind of like uniform universal testing. All right, mobile diffusion. Here we have, let's see, on the mobile diffusion, I asked Chris, could you go at this?
Sure. I read a little bit about this. So mobile diffusion, it's an article about how they're going to start utilizing it on mobile phones. So it's how can you utilize a smaller model that is on a mobile phone that in comparison right now, you have DALL-E and you have Midjourney that take a lot of compute power. how can you develop that compute power of image generation from text to of image, and make it so fast that it's working on a mobile device or within the mobile device compute itself. They're starting to see some really interesting results, maybe like what we saw with Mid-Journey a year ago, maybe a little bit more, but that was like tremendous compute power. So I think what we're going to see is that there's going to be not only research, but new pushes to put text to image generation on models that are self-hosted or hosted within the device ecosystem.
Yeah, amazing. It's going to be, at the edge, right? Other thoughts on this? Paul,
Yeah,
I don't know if you...
I agree. This is similar to the last article. This is a research paper from Google. Tremendous progress on a mobile diffusion model. But, this is, and there's lots of work going on. We've seen other mobile models. This is where we're headed, just as we were with search and other things 10 plus years ago. You're going to get to mobile, but it's going to take a little while. This is still research, so we'll see. Maybe they'll release it in a month, maybe it'll be a year, but the progress is impressive so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, when I think back to what are the implications for our AI leader, I think it's really two things. One is don't get locked into a model too early, especially if you're in our WINS framework. If you're in the crucible or holding a lever, that is, this is vital to your business. You can't get locked in too early. And the second thing is to be thoughtful about the architecture going forward, how you can plug and play, add new capabilities. And I guess the third thing really is the ability to experiment. A lot of IT departments have lost that ability to, experiment and so forth. And so there's some, if you're, in that top half of our matrix, it's really important to be able to do that. All right, so we're going to hit this as optional, but an important trend, important to the edge trend to pay attention to, an important text to visual trend to pay attention to.
Yeah,
right?
And I absolutely agree that the big message here is don't get locked in. So instead of trying to figure out which product to pick, try and figure out how you can be more indifferent to which product you pick at the moment.
And the other thing I would add, Tim and I, Johnny, you and I were at the calls last week with a large life sciences company, is everyone's so trying to understand this on kind of laptop centric view, but this edge view is coming really, really fast. Yeah. So what does it mean when every one of your customers has a shopping assistant or a diagnostic tool in their hand? That's a Cray computer. It's going to change a lot of things out there. Well,
speaking of which, we're going to get to that in a little while with Rufus from Amazon. But right now, Paul, can you give us, I know how much you love regulation, given the entrepreneur you are, and growing up on a farm and everything. You know how farmers and entrepreneurs love regulation. So what about this?
I do think this is what this is that the EU has finalized text for its members to start voting on and go into Parliament. So it's a step in the direction. Some people think this can get out in 3 or 4 months, actually turn into law. I'm more skeptical, but I do think it's important because EU is certainly leading the regulation on AI privacy and regulation. GPTR was a big deal. Millions and millions of dollars have been spent to be compliant with that.
Paul, can I just interrupt and just remind people, GDPR is the general data or global data protection regime?
Global data protection. It had the biggest one there was the right for my own data, right to be forgotten. So companies spent millions. I know we spent millions making sure that we could prove that if someone of our customers said delete your data, it was not in there, and it was real fines if you didn't do that right. We've also seen data centers move over to Europe and Dublin to make sure they're compliant. So this needs to be on the list of a new thing to monitor. It's not law yet, but it could potentially be this year. I think the other thing to watch is that they continue to, I think OpenAI, we had a meeting an article last week that OpenAI was getting smacked again by Italy, which feels to be their, the prodding on what's actually going to be allowed or not. So it's something to watch and monitor for the AI leader that has operations in Europe. So I'll certainly classify it as important.
Yeah, only that it would be essential if it was happening like really soon, but it'll be a phased approach. However, I would say lessons learned from GDPR, right? And companies should really stand up and look at this now and get ready early, even though some regulations will take as long as 2 years to go into effect. Some will come into effect sooner. So I was kind of borderline essential, but because I feel like we've learned lessons from trying to wait too long to come into compliance with these, but then ultimately went with important.
I think we should rate it as essential. This is something people should be certainly aware of and go ahead of the curve, especially with the Italy watching and putting things on hold and banning things. So it's important or it's essential to know that.
Well, yeah. So, look, why is this different than any other compliance? I mean, I don't think we know the penalties. If the penalties are low, then I'll be a late adopter and pay penalties for 2 years.
Well, whatever it is, Paul, it's important for the leader to be aware of it and watch it like a hawk, right? Yes, it might be a simpler route later on. Great. You don't need to watch it as much anymore. But at the moment when it's not certain, but what they've made a big step in the direction of making it a law. I think it's now a matter of just process, right? To get it into the law because it was signed by all the leaders unanimously. So it is kind of de facto law. It's just the kinks have not been worked out completely. So it's important. I think it's essential for them to know that.
Yeah,
I would if I was leading a company that was implementing AI and installing it operations in Europe.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and rate it as essential. I think because you need to do this now. As David says, it's going to be cheaper and better, and certainly need to be aware of it. No matter where you're doing business, the EU is just going to have a huge influence on this. So we're going to make this bad boy essential as for our AI leader. All right, let's get to the next one. All right, here we've got Hugging Face coming out with the ability to make it easier to create your custom chatbots. Luda, I was wondering if you could give us your opinion on this one.
Sure. I thought that we should put it into an important category. Hugging Face, and there's a better article in VentureBeat, so we could post it later. This is just the announcement and X.
We will post that.
Former Twitter, right? So what Hugging Face is a platform of open source AI capabilities, right? That you can pick and choose and put it all together. So they've just announced that they are opening a way to build custom chatbots on their platform. So this is rivaling OpenAI ChatGPT 3.5 and 4, and 4 is very powerful. It has limitations, however. It doesn't have the vector retrieval RAG. It doesn't have the video DALL-E capability type. And so, but they will catch up. So this is important because now it opens a way for people to experiment. And as we talked just a couple of minutes ago, it's critically important the experimentation is in this field. And this allows it in a free, no subscription necessary way.
Great. Chris, what do you think?
I think it's an important announcement, but I think it's essential that people know what Hugging Face is. I think it's one of those names. A lot of people don't even really understand what Hugging Face is or what they sort of do in the ecosystem and who's sort of their backers and how that works. I think Hugging Face being an open source model sort of housing platform and their close sort of connection with hosting providers, I think like Amazon and others, they give people an opportunity for open source. So I think when you think of Hugging Face, you can sort of think of like open source or like what would a chatbot be like if I built it and sort of owned it in a way I can own like an open source software. So I think it's essential that people know Hugging Face and what they're doing and like how all the research large language models are hosted there, so you can really get a good understanding of some of the things in medical or legal or just other models in general are a Hugging Face. So I think everyone should check out Hugging Face if they don't know what it is. The announcement of building chatbots, I think is very interesting, but only like an important announcement. I don't think it's going to move the needle, but I think it's going to be a great opening for Hugging Face to low code, no code programmers.
All righty. Well, sounds like, how about if we put it as important, and then in the commentary we'll say, but understanding Hugging Face is essential if you don't already, for those wonderful reasons you said, both the experimentation and where the research is going to come.
Yep, and I think the bigger trend here, and Hugging Face is part of that. A key part of that is how quickly open source is equaling the performance of the best models, and over time, and you have to be careful because time, could be 3 years or 5 years. But remember, there was a time when Windows was 95% of all the operating system in the world, including data centers. And now it's maybe, I don't know what the statistics are, but feels more like 50-50 with Linux. So I don't think one or the other will end up dominating, is my opinion. I think it'll end up being very similar over the long run, where you'll have important closed systems and important open systems. But right now, there are only closed systems at the top of the list. So this is going to be a big change.
Tim, I want to highlight Michael Online's note of voting for essential as well. But I want to highlight is what you're saying as well for the open source. So we already know 3 or 4 companies that went in production with OpenAI API, and 2 of them have switched to open source, and 2 others are already evaluating open source. So not only are we seeing the measurement gap of the standard speeds and feeds testing, we're actually seeing people go in production with open source, which is I think highlighting your speed of your confidence, the market's confidence about these capabilities.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's such a counterweight to the massive amounts of capital spent by the dominant, cloud providers.
Yeah, and it's early. These are still dorky tools, I'll say, as a technical term. You gotta put on your programming hat for most things to get most things done with these.
Yeah, but somebody's going to come along and put a friendly face on Hugging Face.
They will, absolutely.
Yeah. Even though it's a Hugging Face. Where did that name? I have no idea. It's kind of nuts. Okay, important it is, with lots of commentary on the essential nature of the trend. All right, research. Here we have research happening, and we are looking to Timothy.
Yep. This is really interesting again, if you're into the geeky end of the pool, if you will. Otherwise, it's pretty optional. So maybe if you've got a little extra time on the weekend, you can take a poke at this. It's really a nice summary of more or less everything that's going on right now with large language models, in particular, how they're becoming multimodal, switching from just text to image and sound and other forms of generation of media. So it's a nice summary of everything that's out there. And in fact, if I was an AI leader and I was starting evaluation, I would make sure my team read this, because it's a good broad overview of all the products that are out there. But that's all it is just a quick summary with some information.
Yeah, I was going to mark it important just for this chart as reference, not necessarily reading the whole thing, although everything's benchmarked, right? So you can see the performance, although we know the benchmarks are not amazing at this point. But I just thought this chart would be helpful for an AI leader just to understand what all the offerings were.
And we're certainly hearing that from our clients, a need for that, right? So
you can argue important is a nice survey. It's a little more objective than things that come out like from the investment community that typically are talking mostly about the products they're invested in.
Great. Chris, what's your view on the multimodal stuff? Is it vendor sizzle and customers that can't even digest single modal, or?
I think it's one of the coolest things I've seen, especially when they talk about like artist creativity. What I'm seeing in a lot of the groups, some of the fastest growing social group communities now are image generation groups around different genres and niches. So I think one thing with creativity, I think it's almost unlocked it for those that traditionally couldn't create imagery, right? Yeah. It's very turnkey. And so I think people are adopting it, and the people that are adopting it are the creatives that are using it for their personal use right now. I think it's going to be phenomenal when we get to a point where an architect or an interior designer can take a picture of a room and say, okay, I want it in this styling and design. And I think we'll get to that. So, and when, it may be a few years still before we really are comfortable with voice and spatial computing and multimodality LLMs. I think it's here. We're at this very infant sort of stage. But I think we're going to see amazing things. And maybe from the Vision Pro, we start seeing some of this interesting interaction between a text AI to a voice to an image creation. And we should see that possibly this year, since Apple just launched their Vision Pro. Essentially last week is when it shipped.
Awesome.
Yeah, I want to also highlight that this article takes it down to formulas and explaining how the interactions between the three modalities happen and how you can potentially integrate them a little tighter. So I feel that for a technical person, this is a good summary, as Tim has said. But for a leader, I think it's a little too technical and certainly optional.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and do this. I hear important, I hear optional. I'm going to go for important because on the front end, we've got some very good graphics for the leader. On the back end, we've got some good technical explanation and advice on how to merge the different models together. So let's go for important on that. And Chris, could you take us out with Rufus from Amazon?
All right, so Amazon is launching Rufus. It's essentially a chatbot companion that can be personalized to your buying sort of decisions and behaviors. I think you're going to be able to search with their chatbot solution certain ideas, and it's going to generate not only sort of what you should purchase or your recipe or some direct products, but give you some examples.
Yeah, I went with important on this one, and not necessarily because of the release of this particular tool, but I think any use cases that we're seeing that are, I think, a really good fit for a company at the core of their business just serves as a good example for AI leaders and just companies in general as they're kind of exploring which use cases they're going to pursue. And then just something to note for businesses in general. At first, I thought that this was just going to be kind of generic. Like it almost seemed like it was going to be kind of just a ChatGPT-like functionality put into the app. But then when I played the demonstration, it does serve up actual products if you ask it certain questions. So what'll be interesting to me, we know Amazon at some point got accused of kind of putting their own products to the top of the pack. What is this one going to do? And also, like, what words are going to trigger my product as whatever, Black & Decker, right, versus somebody else's products being served up through this. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there for a general business executive at a retailer. So there's that, but I just thought it was important just because it's an example of putting a generative AI to work in a really critical area for business.
Amazing.
Yeah, I would say important is not essential because this is Amazon's retail division. This is not AWS, right? This is akin to McDonald's to me. And they are putting this right in the heart of their shopping experience, their most critical operational perspective. It's also on the edge, as we were just talking about. It's a mobile application. However they're running it, they may be running the compute in the cloud, but it's running on your phone. And it's a big bet for Amazon, which has struggled because they're, I can't even remember the name of their chatbot now, which is terrible, that they released their business chatbot, Q or something like that, that has not done very well. So it will be interesting to see how well this comes across, but I would probably give this an essential myself.
Yep. Michael notes that this is just the front end for the Amazon Marketplace only right now, but I imagine it will migrate over time. And Mauricio asks, will Rufus be an Alexa on steroids? And I think, and he also says they could have come up with a better name. It was funny. I was thinking about with Rufus. I wonder if that, like with Alexa, it's one of those words that is rarely used.
No, it's the dog. It's one of the early dogs. I think it was Jeff's first dog.
Oh, you're kidding
that
me.
died.
Anyway.
There's a whole story of it on the website.
Anyway, we'll leave that alone. All right, so we're going to put it as important, again, in the core of the business process. So in summary, today we've got OOEI, okay? We have an optional on LLM inaccuracies, laser, mobile diffusion. We have an essential on the EU, important on Hugging Face, multimodal, and the Rufus situation. So one of the things that I really think that if on some of these, if you think back to our WINS framework, if you have a lot of your cost base in WINS work, that's words, images, numbers, and sounds, and if you have a lot, it's very digitized. You might want to upgrade some of these up, crank it up a little bit. So what we call an optional might be important to you and so forth, because if you are in the crucible, that is your business is getting transformed as lawyers are, or educators or media and so forth, you really have to pay more attention to this. Same if you're holding a lever as pharma and some other businesses are. If you're in the balcony or next in line, maybe you can wait a little longer, but the urgency is really there. So hope you found this useful. Thanks to our analyst team, and we'll see you all tomorrow morning with the news of tomorrow.
Thank you for joining, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.